I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Violetta Peterson. Violetta is a carer consultant with Alfred Psychiatry and came into the role after 15 years of working within various disability service providers. Violetta's lived experience informs her broad understanding of the impact of mental illness on families and carers. She shares her compassion, knowledge and insight to support families and carers in the mental health service, as well as deliver family-sensitive education programs to clinical staff. At present, Violetta is actively involved in several mental health projects to improve the quality of experience and service delivery to consumers, families, and carers in Alfred Psychiatry. Welcome, Violetta.
Thank you, Sunil. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to present to you. Most of my days at work are spent walking the halls with young doctors in training who are curious and experiencing the life of psychiatry and hopefully one day becoming a fully qualified psychiatrist. So it's an honour to be here in front of you to share my experience with professionals that have been there and done that as well. I thought I might start the presentation with a bit of open disclosure and to share with you that I'm not really a carer. I don't feel like a carer. I don't know what a carer really looks like. I know that through my experience, I have a parent with a mental health issue, and I also have a child with autism. And in essence, what that makes me is a young person, a child who grew up in a family who experienced the highs and lows of a difficult family experience with mental illness. And also I'm a parent of a child that sees the world in the most glorious colours and shapes. What matters to me most, both from a personal experience but also in the work that I undertake as a carer consultant, is the involvement of families and carers. And the three key issues for me that are most important is around care identification, how we involve families and carers in the practice of mental illness, and also carer wellbeing. And as a young person growing up in the family where mental illness was present, I quite often see that young carers are one of the invisible groups, as are families and carers that are from cultural and language diverse backgrounds. And that then leaves carers to question, am I really a carer? What makes me a carer? There are carers as myself that sit in that category. I don't feel like a carer, but I'm quite open to disclosing that this is what I am. This is what my family's experience has been like. But there are also carers that aren't identified on a general place as a result of their family member not disclosing to health professionals that they have a carer. So we're in a very difficult category, a difficult position as families where we may not be receiving the support or services that we really need. We don't have a presence because of the lack of identification of being a carer. And being a carer is a very complex role and brings on quite a demanding nature of trying to manage day-to-day life. The common experiences that a lot of carers I come into contact with, and also what was reflected in my experience with my family, in particular my mother's experience, were the feelings of guilt, shame, anger, frustration, grief and sadness, the loss of the relationship that we had with my father, seeing that change he was going through, not wanting to relate to my family, that distance growing further and further apart from his children. But most importantly, the despair and the exhaustion, that relentless feeling of, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. But I'm too afraid to ask for help. Who can I talk to? It makes me think about how many carers across the landscape of caring, whether they're a child caring for a parent, whether they're a partner, a grandparent, a sibling even. What does it tell us about their experience of caring and how it impacts them and their well-being? Research into the impact of caregiving shows that 1/3 and to 1/2 of carers suffer significant psychological distress and experience higher rates of mental health than the general population. That's quite a really scary thought to me, that as a carer, we're faced with many challenges that impact on our health. And how are we looking after ourselves as carers? Who are we talking to? Are we talking to our GP? Are we talking to family? Are we talking to friends? Who knows about us as carers and as family members who experience the daily challenges? part of caring is also knowing what skills you need as a carer. I don't know, growing up as a child, I couldn't recognise what those skills were. It was more a layer of protection that my mother placed on me, not wanting me to see the effect that mental health was having on her as a result of the breakdown of the relationship she had with my father. But as I grew older and I became a young adult, I needed to seek some support. I needed to find a way of coping through the challenges that I was experiencing as a young person. The times when I was feeling very bleak and extremely sad, to the point of feeling quite depressed about the situation that I was in, and that no one knew what was going on in my family because we hid it. It was a big secret in our family. We definitely didn't talk about it with anyone. And so the things that helped me and got me to a point of where it helped me understand that there is help out there was talking to a school counsellor who put me into contact with a local support group, who then embraced me, who nurtured me and normalised the feelings that I was experiencing as a young person, the grief, the loss, the anger, frustration, the shame, the guilt. And so carers need to have the opportunity to learn more effective ways of coping with stress. If they can learn new ways to cope, then they can reduce their anxiety. I see a range of carers on a day-to-day basis, carers who have those skills of resilience, carers that can walk the walk, talk to the talk, and can put into practice some good skills around managing stress, about how to establish boundaries, setting limits, how to look after themselves as a carer. But there are also a range of carers that experience high levels of stress and anxiety, carers that aren't really looking after their own needs, who then find themselves seeking medical help and professional help, both from a treatment level, whether it's medication or having to seek some other therapeutic support from family therapists, a psychologist or a counsellor. What we have seen and what I've tended to see in the whole aspect of caring and what helps improve the relationship with the person that the carer is supporting is that involvement. The involvement with professionals, the person and the family, not excluding the family, understanding what are their needs as a family or as a carer, from aspects of their general health and well-being to perhaps some of those financial resources. The impact of finances is a high level of a stress trigger for many families. So an improved understanding what are the carer's needs, I think really helps to develop a more therapeutic relationship between families, professionals and the person. The other aspects of caring which I think help is education. And it's a common occurrence that carers might feel, I don't need that education. I've been on Dr. Google, I've done my research, I know everything there is to know about schizophrenia, about bipolar, about depression. But they're not getting that education from a different perspective, which is other families who have experienced the same trauma of caring for someone with mental health issues. And so what I emphasise very strongly in our practice in mental health service, but also in general community, is to try to connect families with other families, to be able to open up their experience, to learn some good coping strategies, and to reflect on what their experience has been like for them, to help them through that journey, to eventually find some, hope and not live in a life of despair. And so my advice to carers, and the advice that I take on board myself, is to learn as much as you can about the illness, how it affects the person, how it impacts on you, and to understand the side effects of medication and treatments. And most of all, not to be afraid to ask questions. And there's no better place to start asking those questions than your GP. And that's what's helped me along the road to my recovery. And the advice that I give to you is to find out which of your patients may be carers. Believe me, they're out there. They may be young, they may be old. They come in all shapes and sizes. And to offer them support, to promote good health, and to monitor the risk of carer stress. In other words, the carer burden, the burnout that they may experience because of that long road that they travel as carers. I'm open to any questions and really appreciate to have a conversation and an open dialogue with you about anything you might wish to discuss further. Hello, down the middle.
Thank you. You mentioned financial support. That's a very common problem with dysfunctional families. Is there a pathway that we can get to Centrelink? Centrelink in my environment is particularly unhelpful.
In mental health, it's very unhelpful. It's a common thing where carers might be sourcing some assistance to subsidise maybe loss of income, or to support them just with the added burden of extra expenses that they're covering as part of their caring role. In terms of applying for a carer's allowance or carer's payment is difficult because it doesn't quite fit the typical model of caring in most cases, because the illness could be episodic. And you may not be providing the physical support, such as showering, supporting someone with meals. So what we tend to want to encourage carers is to think about their experience of a hard day and what the most difficult day looks like for them in regards to the energy that they exert to motivate someone to have a shower, to motivate them to get up in the morning and get dressed, to motivate them to leave the house even, or sit down and have a meal. And I think that clearly demonstrates what carers are then lacking in terms of support, and isn't financially recognised. That a lot of families, and in particular if you're a young carer, you may be missing out on a lot of school. If you're a carer that's employed, you may be taking a lot of carer's leave or sick leave, and that affects you financially. So if we could be able to, as you say, with government departments who offer some of the financial assistance, be able to demonstrate these are the roles that carers take on, which aren't just your typical physical support caring roles, I think we can make a better difference.
Are there any specific online resources where people can, connect? Because every state's different and things that are available are very variable depending on where you are and what you have in your community. So what would you say is the credible way to access carer support if you identify?
Absolutely. It'd be looking at some of the more consistent forms of information. If we're looking at technological information, would be connecting with your government agencies, your Commonwealth Respite and Care Link Centres, which is a nationwide service and is available in each state, each local region. Then I'd be looking at some of those peak organisations that we're very familiar with, such as Beyond Blue, who provide a range of information and resources to support families in managing their caring role, but also understanding mental health issues. There's great organisations such as SANE, and what would be another one? Locally in Victoria, the two that I would most commonly refer to is Mind and Mental Illness Fellowship. But those peak bodies, and I think those government agencies are the first point of contact to help families navigate the system, which is extremely confusing. And where do you start? Your GP. If anyone, I'd go to your GP. Start with your GP.
My question is to you and possibly to the gentleman who spoke earlier. I want to ask, how do you decide who is your GP? Now, the reason I ask this question is that from what he said, from what you're saying, both as a patient and somebody who has cared for people with mental health issues, having a good GP helps. But how do you, as a consumer, say, this is my GP? The reason I ask this is that in my experience, a lot of people just walk in, they see you, and then next time they see somebody else, and next time they see somebody else. And when you look at their histories, consistently, they've been treated on and off, but they don't have one practitioner looking after them. And I think that affects outcomes. So how do you decide that, okay, this is my doctor? From a consumer perspective, what things makes you to make that decision?
I think it's a great question. I recall growing up with my family, and we thought we had a great GP. It was our family GP who saw my father, treated my father's illness, but also as young kids, treated our general health issues as well. But what we discovered along the way was he wasn't helpful to us as a family. He excluded us from the process of understanding my dad's illness or giving us information, disclosing what was, really happening for my father. We would see him as a person at home and becoming very depressed, paranoid, hearing voices. But then when we'd go to our family GP, he wouldn't give us the strategies or supports to help us because he wouldn't involve us in that process. So what we thought was a good GP didn't eventually turn out to be a good GP. When we did found a GP that helped us, it was one that understood our experience as a family, one that involved us as a family and resourced us, put us into the right contexts. And for me, when I reflect on my experience with the diagnosis of my child's disability, I decided not to go to my usual GP, but I went to someone who didn't know me. And they saw things from a fresh set of eyes. They were able to kind of not tick the boxes, but listen to me and to understand that as a parent who has now had a young child diagnosed with autism, I was now facing a new set of challenges, and I was grieving as a parent as well. So that helped me to identify this is a good doctor, someone who saw me with a fresh set of eyes, didn't place me in a box, didn't know my entire history, but was willing to listen and to hear my story and understand me and what my family and what in particular I needed as well. So I think that's the distinction between a good GP and a GP that sees something that others may not see. I might throw it to Rowan. What's your interpretation of a good GP? What do you look for in a GP?
For mine, the GPs, they sort of formed two different categories. There was a GP you wanted when you needed a medical certificate, and I didn't care which one I saw as long as I got a medical certificate. You probably had a number of those. And then it was really trying to make a mature decision to say, I need to see somebody and form a relationship with them and commit to seeing that same person. And so it was really a conscious decision. It's almost a contract between the GP saying, next time, please come and see me. Don't see somebody in the practice, please come and see me. So it required, I guess, a little bit of that.
Sorry. It required a little bit of me accepting that I just wanted to see this and build a relationship with this one person. But it's very difficult with people moving around, people changing jobs, changing homes. It's very, very difficult, I'm sure, to form a consistent customer base, I suppose, from a GP point of view. But I needed to see a GP beyond a medical certificate, and I needed to see a GP as somebody who cared for my overall well-being. And once I found someone like that, I was prepared to wait and see and trust. Again, it's part of that trust and building trust and connection with somebody. So I hope that helps.
Sorry. Sometimes you see a patient, and mainly if it's a male, they don't want to discuss it with their family. They don't want their family to get involved. They're happy to talk to you, and you're happy to listen. But where is the boundary about confidentiality issue? Like, how would you get the man to get his wife and his family involved? Like, that becomes an issue too. So, can you tell me?
I was waiting for that question, which on purpose I didn't want to go into too much around the information and confidentiality. It's I think it's a very divisive topic of discussion. I know where I sit in terms of how important it is to involve families. My father didn't want my mum to be involved in his treatment and his care. And as a young person growing up, that was also something that I experienced in terms of my father wanting to manage it himself and not wanting my family to be involved. Now where I come from in terms of working with families in a professional scope of to see the benefits, I really recognise and to be able to really see that those families that we engage with and we're mindful of where the person gives consent and doesn't give consent, but recognising what is the impact? What will be the impact to this carer if we don't involve them, if we don't share information with them? If they're living under the same house, is something that we want to be very mindful about how we can better resource this family. Communication, honesty, from the onset being able to present a very clear objective that part of my practice is to involve families, and I want your family to be involved. I don't want to exclude it. It's an important part of your care that we involve your family as well. But it's always going to be tricky. It's a fine line to tread.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, there's one here at the front. Yeah.
I'm talking about how you went to the GP with your son. So you would have gone like, this is his behavior and this is it. And I think the GP has got that much time that they concentrate on the patient. So what is the question you would like them to ask you to see how much is it affecting your life also?
I was having a chat to Rowan outside before our presentation. I think the one question that opens up Pandora's box is just ask how they're going. How are you? It could either set the realms of, you know, everything bubbling out and those emotions and feelings of not coping and struggle will instantly come out. Or you'll see a carer or a family who will respond by saying, I need help and I'm struggling in this ways. What can you offer me? Is there someone that I can talk to? So just asking that question is a very powerful way of connecting with families and carers. How are you? How are you going? But it's identification. I think that's the tricky thing here is how do we identify who is a carer if they don't identify themselves in the role of caring, or the person who they support doesn't identify that they have a carer as well. So there needs to be some conversation, some open dialogue there. I'm going to say thank you. Thank you so much, and it's been lovely to speak with you.